What is going on, Diesel Nation? We're excited to have you guys with us today on the Diesel Podcast. Today, I've got Noah, who's going to be our guest. He's a Diesel Podcast listener, and he had a really cool story. He was telling us about not having a diesel truck, and he tuned into the podcast, started listening to our guests in different companies, and how it helped him make a decision to buy not just one truck, but two, and he's heading towards a third, which is going to be a really cool build. So we wanted to ask him about his journey through diesel, picking the trucks that he did, some tips he's learned along the way, trying to maximize his budget, maximize the build. So it's going to be a great chat. Before we get to it, though, I want to remind you guys you can save 20% off site-wide with Kershaw Knives. They're a sponsor of the podcast. We appreciate their support and also them offering 20% off. So just go to kershaw.kiausa.com, enter code diesel20, get 20% off something, whether you need it for daily carry, something around the house, at work, job site. They've got a ton of different choices to meet any budget. And they got a lot of really cool things. And I appreciate you guys, posting up pictures, sending me pictures of what you gotten from them. So definitely take advantage of that and save some money. Also, if you're listening on YouTube, when you find our guests, the topics that we're talking about really helpful, whether you're building a truck, learning more about diesel, trying to plan out a build, or just trying to find your first diesel truck, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, like and comment. Those help us grow tremendously on YouTube and be able to reach other diesel truck owners who may not know the podcast, so that we can get the message out to them, get our guests' topics and the information that they're sharing out to more diesel owners. All right, let's get to today's episode with Noah and learning more about his journey through diesel and buying not just one truck, but two, and he's heading towards his third. Noah, welcome to the Diesel Podcast. I'm excited to chat with you today. I appreciate you being on our Discord, listening to the podcast, and when you were telling me a bit about your story and journey through diesel, I thought it would be great to have you on, because I know there's a lot of listeners we have that don't have a diesel, and then they're looking to get into one, and you've been on that journey, so it should be a really, really good conversation. I look forward to chatting with you.
Yes, sir. I guess I'll just start, as we were talking a little bit about before the podcast, just how I got into diesel. Is that where you'd like to start? Or
yeah, tell me how you got started on, were you always into cars and trucks, or always into diesels at the start, or how did you come to really like diesel power and want to own one?
well, growing up, I lived on a cattle farm, and so we always had equipment. And my uncle, he was a diesel mechanic for Cat for 20 years. And so he'd always work on the tractors, and I'd watch him, and I really had no interest into it. But when I started getting older and started, seeing more of how they work and what you can do with them, that's when my interest for them really spiked. And, I still didn't ever think I wanted to own one, but I knew what they were and knew about them. Well, a little bit in the future, I start wanting to look for trucks and wanting to get into trucks. And so, like I was telling you, my uncle had that 6.0, and he stopped on that gravel road, and just the way it hit and set you back in your seat, and the sound and the smoke and the smell, it started an addiction. That's what it is. It's an addiction.
Oh yeah.
And that's what did it for me.
It was one of the things I remember that captured me about him was that 4-wheel drive boosted launch, and feeling just that torque. All of a sudden you hear it, you feel it. I don't know, prior to that point, if I ever felt that on a car or another truck before. And then it's like how much power you can get out of them, at the start. So easy. It's like at 100, 120 horsepower, 150, you can just get so much. And I remember when we were chatting a little bit, you said, hey, I listened to the Diesel Podcast before I had a truck. And so I wanted to ask you, when you were thinking about getting into them, what, were you set on a certain platform, like you definitely wanted a Powerstroke or Duramax or Cummins, or was there a specific platform that you really focused in on and you're like, that's the truck I want to buy?
Oddly enough, so growing up, if your dad liked the Cowboys, you like the Eagles,
Yeah.
So I was set on a Duramax. I did not want a Powerstroke. I hated Powerstroke. I hated Cummins. I wanted a Duramax. Well, in Texas, we don't have a bunch of Duramaxes down here. And, so I started looking, and, Duramax is here. They got 250,000 miles, and they want 20 grand for them. And so it was like, man, I really want this Duramax, but that's just unrealistic. I can't pay that.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of when I started looking more at the Powerstroke platform, just because they're a dime a dozen here, you know. But I really want a Duramax, and I'm going to end up with one before I croak. I will own a Duramax.
It's really funny you mention that because as a kid growing up, my dad was a Ford guy and a Powerstroke guy, so naturally I'm like, I can't like what you like, so I gotta like a
Yeah,
Dodge with a Cummins. Like, can't like the same thing.
exactly. That's how it was.
Now, when you were looking for, say the first truck, how hard was it to find what you were looking for?
So I looked and looked and looked I was looking at Duramaxes, but I would look at the 7.3s just because I loved that body style.
Yeah.
Well, one morning I'm waking up and I go to my grandpa's house and he's sitting there on Craigslist on the farm and garden section of all sections, you know, old people. Well, he's scrolling through and here's a 97 F250 crew cab short bed. It had like 312,000 miles when I got it, and they wanted $4,000 for it. It had been posted like 2 hours before, so I called the guy. And I was like, "Hey, I can come look at the truck with cash. You know, I want this truck." And so I drove 2 hours to go look at the truck with my cousin, and it just ended up working out perfectly. You know, for $4,000, it was a steal of a truck.
Was it ready to drive right away, or did you need to do some work or maintenance on it?
I was actually able to drive it home.
So it was ready to go.
It cut out on me.
Oh, I just said so. The truck was ready to go then, like right when you purchased it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I bought it. I stopped at the gas station and went home.
Did now when you got it, did you have a plan for like upgrades you wanted to do, or was it going to be something that you daily drove? Maybe towed something, hauled a little bit with, and you just wanted to do the maintenance on it, or what were your ideas for the truck?
Well, originally the idea for the truck was a family rig. I had an extended cab. I had two kids. I couldn't do that, so it was just going to be a family truck. And it's still a family truck. The only thing I've done to it is an exhaust and little things. But I really wanted to have a fast truck. And then I think I made a mistake of buying a 7.3 and expecting it to be fast because it's not that. But you can make it that. Now I want to eventually, but for right now, I think I'm going to keep it where it's at until I can do the transmission because it's an E4OD, and you ain't throwing a bunch of power at a stock E4OD with 345,000 miles now.
I think
So
what's really cool about 7.3s though is there is a build plan, or there's you can make really good power with them, and we've seen that. And I've had a couple of guests on talking about it. So if you want to take it there one day, you could. And I think that's what's really cool about the older trucks is, way back then it was like, oh, you want to go fast, you buy a 12 valve or a common rail 5.9 or an LB7, but you can do that with that 97 if you want to.
oh yeah, that's the thing. It's just right now, like you go on any website, they'll have 500 horsepower kit for the 7.3 and 800 horsepower kit for a 7.3. So there's actually a lot of aftermarket for the 7.3s, considering how old of a truck they are now.
Yeah. Yeah, and what was interesting is you had told me, I didn't own a diesel, and now I've got two of them, so I know that that the
Yeah.
passion didn't end with just with the Ford OBS. What's the next one that you got?
So the 6.0 I actually showed you is the exact truck my uncle owned that got me into diesels.
Oh, cool.
So he had owned it. Man, I think it was 2011, 2012 when he bought it. And so he bought it. And of course, it pulled a 6.0 and lifted a head, blew a head gasket. So he did aluminum cylinder heads. He did all this work to the engine. And he kept having problems with it. He kept having problems with it. And like right now, it's been down for about, I think, 5 or 6 months with the fuel injection control module burned up. And so we ordered the fuel injection control module. We're waiting for it to get here, but you know, just knowing what's all been done to the truck, everything that's gone to it, it's
Yeah.
kind of like what else can break, you know? you feel safe knowing that all this has been replaced.
Yeah.
That's kind of what made me like, okay, I feel confident in buying it because everything has been replaced.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot when buying a diesel truck, because it, just looking out there on the market, you never know who did what to it before. If it was
Uh-huh.
running big injectors, turbo, they put it back to stock. You just don't know. So with a truck like that, you know the background on it, so you know what's been upgraded, things you may want to do in the future, need to do. With this particular truck, do you have bigger plans for it, like aftermarket turbo injectors, built transmission, or is this one going to be, what kind of role is it going to fulfill for you?
So it actually has right now. When he bought it, he wasn't aware of this, but it has a flash on the ECM, so it's tuned, and that's why it rips so hard. So I'm kind of thinking, sorry, tuned. Let's go ahead, throw an exhaust on it, throw a turbo on it, throw some injectors in it, and maybe we can have a pretty fast crew cab long bed. I'm not saying get into trouble with, but have some fun with.
Have a little fun. Where I'm always curious, like, when you're newer to diesel, where you find information, or learn about, like, what kind of turbo do you want to run on that 6.0, or what kind of things do you want to do? Because like when I was getting into them, it was really heavy with forums, and I haven't been on a forum, gosh, I don't even know how long, and everything's so different now. So when you're looking at parts, where do you find a lot of helpful information, or what people or companies have you chatted with that have helped you put together a plan for it?
So honestly, your podcast has been the biggest one, because you have so many episodes that touch on things that you might not read on forums or might not read on a Facebook page or something like that. And so listening to the podcast is actually, I've learned a lot, and I know a lot of companies that I'm going to look at when I start buying stuff for the truck. And
Yeah,
so I think that's what's so great about your podcast is you talk to all these companies about niche stuff that you might not get to read or
yeah.
hear and see anywhere else.
Yeah, that's something I appreciate that, and something we really try to do is, like, I haven't owned a 6 liter. I haven't gone through building one. I don't know what turbo is going to react well, or what size injectors, but I can get KC turbos on. I can get somebody else on to chat about it. And same thing with like OBS stuff, or an LB7. I've never owned an LB7. I don't know how it responds to this EFI tune and these injectors and this turbo and this converter stall. So I like to be able to try to put that out there. So if somebody's going through a build like you are, you've heard from a couple different places, and kind of start that journey a little bit of, what should I look at? How's it going to respond? And there's just so many choices out there and so much information. You're right. It can be kind of tough to find, how do I get my 6 liter to this power level, or my OBS to,
Mm-hmm.
do X, Y, Z.
And that's the thing. Like you talk to so many people that are actually in the industry versus where you go on Facebook and post, what injector should I run on my 6.0? Well, you can talk to the guy and be like, what injector should he run for this build? Or,
Yeah.
you get the professional mind into it instead of just some random person.
That can be really tough. When I think back to when I wanted to do something on a truck, and back then, just jumping on a forum or something, it's like I could get a lot of different opinions, but I didn't know this. Did this guy actually build this, his truck to 850, or did he read something? Or it just helps when like chatting with like Lenny Reed from Dynamite Diesel Out Injectors.
Yes, I love Lenny.
Like he's really fun to chat with, and I can ask him, like, hey, what does this do? What size do I need? Or there's so many different places. So I mean, with the 6 liter stuff, like, it is so popular, and there's so many people that reach out all the time, are like, hey, do more 6.0 content, chat about it. So I think there's leaders in the industry, and even in the race side, that have pushed that platform so far. It's cool to see, because there was a time when if you had a 6 liter, it's like you could tune it. That's all you were going to do. You're never going to keep up with a Duramax or Cummins. That's not the same anymore.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. I mean, right now you look at the reputation of 6.0, and it's if you keep them together, that's the truck.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It's just keeping them together.
well, I see like posts on Instagram and stuff for like an '06 or '07 59 or an LBZ, and it's like the price of those trucks is insane. And you think, if you want to do stuff to it, do you want to spend most of your money buying it, or do you want to spend most of your money on parts and a transmission and the things that, you want to make power with?
Exactly. And that's why exactly with the 7.3, I paid $4,000 for the truck. My budget was about 20. That gives me $16,000 to play around on the truck.
Yeah.
Versus you go buy the 6.6 LBZ, you're spending $20,000 just to get the truck. You know, so these Powerstrokes, while they might not make as much power as the Common Rail Cummins or the LBZ Duramax, you have a lower buying cost versus the other ones, so you can afford to do more to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the topic of power too is another really tricky one, because if you're going to drive a truck every day, how much power can you really use on the street or towing a trailer? Or how much do you want to spend in fuel, because you're just tossing so much fuel at a single turbo or, a set of compounds? And so I think that's another side of it, because I mean, I've been there too. It's like, I want 1,000 horse daily driver. Do I really? Like, is it going to be reliable? How long is it going to last? Maybe 550, 600 is perfect. And either one of those trucks can reach it. But I really do see with the 6.0, it's like, there's just a resurgence of it. And I see it with people asking for content for it. So hearing that you got one and your plans for it, and knowing what was done to that truck is going to be really cool. Now, once you get, it was the Ficum you were waiting for, right?
Yes, sir.
So once you get that, what's your next step with the 6.0?
I think the next step, just because I love hearing those turbos, is going to be straight pipe. It's got to be straight pipe. I need a truck that sounds just like a jet engine going down the driveway,
Oh yeah.
So I'd like to do that, and then I'd love to throw a set of injectors in it, get a little more fuel at it, and then of course turbo. I mean, it's just going to be a downward spiral of bad financial decisions. That's how we have fun.
Yeah, exactly. The diesel trucks really are an addiction, and it starts so small with just usually a tune, and then the tune leads to something else, and eventually you're sitting there looking at, a truck with a roll cage and fiberglass body panels, and towing it with another truck, and that's kind of how it works.
And see, when I owned a gasser, I never messed with it. I left it alone. It was stock. And then I bought the 7.3. It was like, all right, I'm changing downpipes. I'm changing exhaust. And, just messing with it, just because there's so much more you can do to them to get power.
Yeah.
And you can make so much more power with doing little.
Yeah. Well, and you have the utility too. So you could double the power of it and still drive it, or still, go on a road trip or something. Whereas, there are some really cool cars out there. There's one of my favorites has always been like an older Cobra, like an 03, 04 Cobra. And I think that would be fun to play with, but am I going to take it on a road trip? Can I take more than one person with me? Or am I going to you can't do it, but you can do it with that diesel truck.
Yeah. And you can still work with it and enjoy it. And it's still comfortable, no matter if you're making, 250 horsepower or 500 horsepower.
Yep.
They can still be useful.
You had mentioned to me Duramax earlier in the podcast, and also on when we were chatting, a little bit beforehand. What plan do you have with either a motor or a swap or getting a Duramax truck?
In them, and everybody does the 12 valve. And I always wanted to do that, and then I started looking, and it's just as easy to put a Duramax in one. I mean, there's a lot more wiring and all that, but who wouldn't want a square body Duramax?
Yeah.
So I've been trying to piece together an LB7 to put in the crew cab. It's tough right now because, like I said, there's not a lot of Duramaxes in Texas. As far as I've researched, I mean, they're hard to find. And so once I do end up getting an LB7, I'm going to put it in the crew cab, and I'd like to try to find the ZF6, which was behind the Duramaxes. They were rare to find, but they had them behind Duramaxes, and have a crew cab, square body Duramax with the manual transmission.
I'm not sure if you caught our recent episode where I was chatting with a shop owner who does swaps, and he was talking about doing that with square body Chevys and putting in either Cummins, or a lot of guys are wanting to do a Duramax because it comes in the GM vehicles, and being able to do that. And there's a lot of choices for, you know, the wiring harness and getting them to run. So I think you'll find that you have definitely a lot of choices and resources out there to be able to do that. And that's just a cool build. And I think I mentioned it on that episode as well, is it's so cool to take an older body style that's iconic and be able to add current common rail diesel technology and the whole aftermarket that's existed for 20 years with, you know, an LB7. So you're going to have a lot of fun with that build.
Oh yeah, I cannot wait to start that one. As soon as I'm done buying all these Powerstrokes, that is going to be the next focus, and getting that off the ground, because that's going to be a fun build.
What having, you know, you bought these two trucks, you're planning on this really cool square body LB7 swap. For somebody who doesn't have a truck right now and they're listening to the podcast, what are a couple things you would tell them to think about, either when they're looking to buy a truck, they don't know what platform they want to get, they're trying to set up their budget, that could help them make a good decision and be happy with a truck that they can grow with?
I'd say the one thing is buy smart. You know, you may not be able to go buy the truck with forces right now and the big turbo. It's better to start small. Start with something that stock and build the truck you want. Because if you go spend all your money on buying a nice truck, you're not going to have any money when it breaks. And they ultimately will break at some point. So, you know, get you something you can afford at the time and build it to where you want it. Because when I bought my 7.3, there wasn't much I could do to it. But now, over the past year, I've gotten more money to do more with it. And if I would have bought a different truck, I would have just been straddled with payments, and, you know, I got to pay for this truck. I want to do this for the truck, but I got a monthly payment and insurance. So I think you just buy smart instead of what looks good, you know?
I think that's really good advice, because there's a lot of friends that I've had, and even myself, is I did it the opposite way. And I bought the newest, latest, greatest thing, and then I couldn't do anything to it for like 2 years, like nothing. I didn't have the money to do it. It was all wrapped up in a payment and everything else. And I think, you know, being able to chat with a lot of different people and just being around diesel longer, man, that's what I love about older trucks, is you can take a 20, 25-year-old truck and have it make the power of a 2022 if you want. And
Exactly.
they're much simpler, and you have, you know, tons of companies out there that are supporting us. I think that's really good advice, and it can be hard to do because we see the pressure, you know, the 2022, 2021 with these really nice wheels, lift, tires, suspension, and you're 100K into this thing, and it's like, that's great, but if you want the performance or the reliability or just to customize it, you can do it way easier with an older truck that meets your budget, and then taking the time to upgrade it.
Exactly. And that was my point of view, was if I get something new, I'm going to have to worry about payments. I'm going to have to worry about the emission system, which, you know, that is what it is, you know, but
Yeah.
the older truck just made more sense at the time, you know, and that's kind of the way I look at it, is just buy what you can get and enjoy it. You
Yeah.
know, you're not going to be able to go buy the L5P, you know, tomorrow, but in 10 years, maybe you can buy an L5P and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think that's a really huge difference I noticed in gas versus diesel. Is like with gas, when I was into them a long time ago, it was like you had to pay attention to the model year changes, because they'd get 20, 30 horsepower here, or 40 there, or, you know, a new engine would come out. Whereas diesel, it's like you can double it on something 25 years old or 10 years old or whatever it is. And it's just, I think for an enthusiast, it's really cool. And I know there's going to be people listening that are into OBSs or into 6 liters, or they want to see this square body, the Duramax build that you're doing. Where can they find your Instagram, be able to check out, you know, what you're doing with trucks? Or maybe they have a question for you, like, hey, how do you like your 7.3, or how do you like your 6.0, or you know, when you get to the LB7 build, like, hey, where'd you find the harness, or where'd you get that ZF transmission for it?
My Instagram, if anybody wants to reach out, which is perfectly fine, is a crew cab god, all one word. And so you can reach me on there. And, you know, I'm happy to talk about diesels all day. I'll talk your ear off. We can, So yeah, if you want to reach me, Crew Cab God on Instagram is, the way to reach me.
Well, I appreciate you listening to the podcast and being on our Discord and then, reaching out to us on Instagram. I'm really excited for the builds that you have. I can tell you're passionate about them. You have a plan. You love, what you're building. And that's why we do this podcast, is to chat with enthusiasts like you. So I appreciate you, jumping on. I know sometimes being on a podcast, like most people aren't on podcasts. They be kind of, nerve wracking to be on and stuff. But I mean, it's really, inspiring and encourages people out there that no matter what truck you want, find the means to get it, have fun with it, make a plan, and you're doing just that. So it was really exciting to chat with you today, and keep me updated on the builds. Let me know, or if you can't find something for your your LB7 build or something for your 6-liter, let me know. I'm happy to connect you with a resource or someone who can answer a question.
That sounds good to me, man. I enjoyed being on. It's my first podcast, so.
We're glad it was the Diesel Podcast.
Oh, me too. I've been waiting.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to kershaw.kiausa.com. Enter code Diesel20. You get 20% off site-wide. They've got a ton of different choices for any budget, any use you might have for a knife, for hunting, fishing, everyday carry around the house, at the job site. They've got so many cool things to choose from, so definitely take advantage of that. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters, which have always helped us grow, do things that we want to do with our audio, visually, just be able to add more elements to the podcast. Tyler Loewen at 23 Diesel, Wrights Diesel Services, Kaleb, we appreciate their support. All of our Patreons, all of you who subscribe on YouTube, podcast apps, our Discord, Instagram, Facebook. You guys keep us going. We appreciate the support. You guys are the ones who inspire us and keep us, coming up with creative ideas and covering all the stories in diesel. Until next time, keep the shiny side up.